Test. Test. Test 1, 2, 3, 4.
You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with data and all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Emily Drunk, and tonight on episode 48, we're going to go around the league discussing the latest Overwatch League news. Rosterpocalypse is upon us. We're going to wrap up Contenders Australia with a little bit of analysis, and of course, we will take a look at this upcoming weekend's Overwatch World Cup group stage, which, is a pretty big team. Our home country playing in the Los Angeles group stage, so definitely got to talk about that. But before we can get into the news and introduce you to my co-host, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us tonight over in Twitch for our live show. And of course, thank all of our repeat listeners. As you can tell, we are a man short tonight. Some had a little bit of a minor emergency, so he will not be here with us tonight. And that may or may not have anything to do with, some of the news coming out about Atlanta potentially signing a head coach. Formerly of San Francisco Shock and Selfless Gaming, but that's not official yet. We'll talk about that when it actually happens, because obviously, we're still waiting on expansion team news, which, we'll probably get a lot of finalized talks in regards to expansion teams this week as well, since, that sign-in window does open up for them very soon. But as you can see, guys, I'm joined by my co-host, Spider. And Spider, there's been a lot of movement. So much movement, in fact, that I had to create a spreadsheet just to keep track of everything, because there is a lot of movement going on. But, obviously, we got a bunch of Warcraft going on. The Summer Games is at its end, practically. Or it's already over. We got a new competitive season. There's a lot going on, both inside and outside of Overwatch. So how has your week been?
It's been pretty good. Like you said, it's been pretty crazy from an Overwatch standpoint. It was like, oh, cool, this guy got released, this guy got moved, and then all of a sudden it was just like the floodgates opened, and teams are like, oh, he's gone. Shanghai Dragons are gone. It's crazy. So we had to temper that with some dull, boring MMO gameplay to kind of bring our heart rate down a little bit. But beyond that, it's been a fun week. I mean, we had a 3-day weekend, or at least I had a 3-day weekend, which we kept very busy. We made the kids run all kinds of places all over the place just so that they would sleep at night, which they are luckily currently doing, and I hope they will continue to do so during this what will probably be long show. But I had a lot of fun. I am starting a new account. My new account will be Doomfist, Hammond, Sombra, because those are the 3 characters I really want to focus on, and I have a little experience on all 3 of them, mostly Sombra, and it is called Ham-Fisted Taco. So that will be what you get to look forward to on Friday. So we will still probably get out a gold Friday, but I have the people that I do it with are actually out of town for the next couple of weeks. So I kind of wanted to get this account up and running and stuff like that, and go forward from there. So look forward to that, the return of the stream on Friday, now that all this holidays and summer and craziness is out of the way. So what about you, man? How has your week in and out of Overwatch been with the end of the summer games?
It's been pretty good. Obviously, there's been a ton of contender stuff, which is always great to see. We had Australia and South America wrap up, and with South America, we got a little bit of a preview of what we might expect to see at this upcoming Overwatch World Cup group stage, because Team Brazil happens to be majority of Brazil Gaming House, who has basically just been the team that has been winning pretty much anything and everything within that region in competitive Overwatch outside of the game. I've been trying to gear up my Resto Druid, trying to find a raid team, but it's really hard to find a team that fits my current schedule just because of, how much content creation that I'm doing. So I don't know whether or not I'm going to be able to settle down and find a raid team, but I'll keep looking, because I don't want to have to resort to creating my own team and raid lead again, just because I did that for so long, and it's too much added stress, and I just don't need that. But I have been spending a ton of time fishing in World of Warcraft, so that's how I've been making my money, and, of course, banking, some of the foods that I need, and, banquets and things like that. But, raids open tomorrow, and I don't have a team, so I don't know what to do right now.
You're a healer, man. You can pick up a pug and at least clear the first couple of bosses. I'm with you though. I am not really looking for a raid team. Unlike you, I have 2 kids. I don't need to manage more children, which is basically what raid leading is. It's don't stand there, don't go there, follow me, do this, blah blah blah. Basically parenting. Like I raid led in Cataclysm, and I feel like it made me a better parent because I know how to talk to people without making them upset like they're a 3-year-old. So, it all comes around. You know, I don't know if you're in the guild, like the CTR guild, but they're like heavily looking for people right now. Like I see like raid teams posting all kinds of stuff on the forums. So I would hit up the forums, man, if you're really looking for one. But I'm going to focus on Overwatch. Like, as a parent, I have to kind of laser focus one game. So I'll probably do Mythic Plus. Like, that's kind of the thing I've set down for. I'm like, I want to tank or DPS Mythic Plus. That's something that I don't need a team for, or, I don't need a large team. It can be pretty like, oh, cool, we're all on tonight. Let's do, X amount of Mythic Plus and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be, let's set aside 4 to 8 hours a week and bang our head against these giant tentacle monsters. I don't know, man. Those days are past for me, at least.
Absolutely. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump to this week's news as we go around the league. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, we are in what we have dubbed Rosterpocalypse, because there's a lot of movement going on, and as I said, I have a spreadsheet, so I'm going to go ahead and link that in the Twitch chat if people want to look at it. So obviously, a lot of teams are making some pretty big moves. A certain team making a lot more moves than others because of, not winning a game in 40 games. But anyways, so I'm just going to remind everyone about the current timetable when it comes to these sign-in windows and expansion teams, all of that good stuff. So basically, teams right now have until September 8th to negotiate contract extensions with their current players, to sign players from their affiliated contenders team, and to make player trades. The player trades is going on throughout all of the windows, so they're still able to do that beyond then. So when that window closes, basically anyone that is not under a contract will become a free agent. And then on September 9th, that is when an exclusive sign-in window opens up for the Overwatch League expansion teams to sign free agents, and that lasts about a month. That ends on October 7th. After that, then that free agent signing window will open up to, all of the original teams. So with that in mind, obviously there's a lot of stuff going on right now. We saw a ton of teams making moves. We saw a couple of people get reassigned to a different role on teams. We've seen coaching changes. We've seen practically entire rosters just dropped outside of a couple Korean players. There's so much to keep track of, and hopefully the spreadsheet will just make it easier on everyone. It's still a work in progress in regards to who is staying on the teams, because obviously more changes are going to be coming, within the next, 5-6 days. So keep that in mind. But as of right now, it is completely up to date. So with that being said, let's go through the teams one by one, and we'll go through who's been dropped, who's been kind of like reassigned, things like that. Obviously, we had a couple of surprises, and some that obviously are not going to come as a surprise to anyone, just given the lack of playtime. But first up, let's talk about Boston Uprising. So far, there have been 4 different players that have been dropped from the roster. We have Avast, Kelios, Mistakes, and Snow. So Mistakes actually came later. Avast, Kelios, and Snow were the first ones to be released from this roster. And, Mistakes is kind of like the curious one in regards to these 4, because this is a player that had started out as a tracer specialist for the team, and it was really a major part of Boston's undefeated group stage. Granted, we saw how the playoffs worked in that stage because they didn't do as well. But Mistakes definitely played a vital role on this team. And, considering the situation that Boston was in at the time, having lost to was considered to be their star DPS player and kind of like their carry. Not to say that Striker wasn't, doing amazing things as well. But after losing DK, it was basically like, what's going to happen to Boston? And Mistakes was the one that rose to the occasion and helped propel that team to just a different level at that point. So, we look at Avast and Snow. Those are two players that really didn't see play and haven't been dropped from the team. Like, that frees up, them not having 5 support players on that roster because, I always looked at them like, okay, half of their team is support players. What's going on here? We always kind of joked about, oh, I guess they're just preparing for the triple support meta, which did it really happen?
I mean, the meta happened, but they didn't run it. I mean, that was the thing. Like, Avast and Snow, it's not a surprise that they were dropped. And frankly, I'm sure they'll end up on contenders teams. I don't think they're hot prospects for expansion teams, but I feel like Mistakes is. And I feel like Mistakes being a separate announcement and how good of a player he was. I mean, you can't discount how good of a player he was. It kind of leads some, I don't know. It just, we heard a lot of like, there might have been some inner turmoil, like especially, with Krusty and all that stuff. So it kind of leads, I guess, that there might be a little more truth in that than what we know about, because I feel like Boston wouldn't have gotten rid of Mistakes. I feel like they would have used him and maybe somebody else besides Striker, because actually near the end of the season, it was Striker that struggled more than Mistakes.
Right.
So I'm curious to see how this plays out, but I'm even more curious to know what the external reasoning was for this, because I feel like play wasn't enough to warrant him being released. I feel like this had something to do with personality or dare say ego, or who knows what the story is behind it. But any of the expansion teams looking for a solid like flex DPS, even as a sub, would be behooved to pick up Mistakes.
Absolutely. So moving on, let's talk about the Houston Outlaws, who have stated like they are done making their changes in regards to their players. So first up, Houston Outlaws have parted ways with their tank player, Fact Fiction. Fact Fiction had joined Houston back in February, which was like a week after Stage 1 had began, so pretty early mid-season pickup. We saw Clockwork being reassigned to a non-player role with the team. So he's still going to be on the Outlaws staff. And, they didn't really specify what he'd be doing, but he had kind of, talked about how he was doing a lot of VOD analysis for the team. So I'm assuming it's probably going to tie into that, just so he can, still remain on the team and help him out with any way that they can. But, who knows whether or not they're going to put a label on it. But for now, just know that he is part of the staff. And then, a certain player that we were always curious to see whether or not he'd be off of the bench, because he is a bench boy. Mando Kusai was also reassigned, and he is now no longer a player for the Outlaws, but he is going to be a content creator for Houston. So Mendo has been freed, not in the way that, most people would have thought, but, Mendo had talked about, how there were opportunities that, the Outlaws wanted to play him at times. The opportunity was there for him to play, but for whatever reason, whether it was stress or him just not feeling it in the moment or, feeling like he was a liability or anything like that, was a reason why he didn't want to put himself into that role. So he can still be kind of like on watch party duty, in a sense, for the Outlaws. But, Mendo has a pretty big following. He's been around the scene for quite some time, and I feel like this content creator role is going to be better suited for him since, his nerves have just been kind of shot given the whole experience.
No, I mean, it's not surprising that's where he ended up, because if you watch his stream for any amount of time, you can see that's kind of where he's happy. That's where he feels it. I think he kind of got in his head that he wanted to pursue the pro route, and I don't know, this is going to sound really mean, but I don't know if he really had the skill to back that up. He has a lot of personality, and I feel like he is a much better streamer than a player. And that's not to say he's a bad player, because obviously he's still top 500. He's still phenomenal compared to everybody else. But if you listen to any of these pros after season 1, you can see the amount of strain and turmoil that season 1 put on a lot of these players. I mean, look at Neptuno. Neptuno basically had to bow out of World Cup because he was like, I just can't play right now. So I feel like Mendo saw this and he said, I'll be happier streaming. And the Outlaws are like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. So we're just going to transition to that role. And other teams have streamers that aren't on the team. Like Philadelphia Fusion has a few, like they have Kabaji. So this isn't unheard of. Fact Fiction, I'm not surprised they dropped him. Just kind of circling back around. He saw a very limited play time, and he wasn't like wowing anybody. He was serviceable, but I feel like he kind of got picked up just due to his prior connection with the World Cup roster.
Yeah, from last year.
And he'll be picked up by an expansion team or a contenders team really, really quickly because main tank is a hard role to fill, and he is definitely an average or above average main tank when he's slotted with supports that can play around him. Clockwork, though, is the one I am really excited that they did this for because it absolutely proved our point that a lot of the Gen 1 early Overwatch players are going to be transitioning to coach roles. Like I have a feeling that he's not going to be the last one we see do this. So, and he's been around forever. I mean, he played back with Splice, so him kind of transitioning to this role is kind of the way we thought Seagull would go. But Seagull just said, nope, I'd rather make a bunch of money and went streaming. And I don't know if you watched his stream the other night, but Friday night when the season launched, he racked up 3,000 subscribers in one night.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So we know why Seagull didn't go to that role. Clockwork doesn't have that amount of following, so I think he went the what do you call that? He went the 9 to 5 route. He went the business route. So I'm happy for him. He's a smart guy. Like if you watch him stream, if you've watched him in the past, he is a very smart guy. So I think this will be a very good role. They'll probably label it like player coach or something, or just an analysis, whatever. It doesn't matter. He will absolutely help the team.
Absolutely. So moving on, let's talk about the LA Gladiators. So they have gone out and released 3 of their players. So we have Asher, iRemix, and Silk Thread. Okay, so this news comes after, the recent transfer of Fisher over to the Seoul Dynasty, which happened last month. So iRemix, this was someone that had competed throughout all of Stage 1, but saw less play due to Fisher having taken over the main tank position at the beginning of Stage 2. iRemix would then go on to compete in all of the Gladiators playoff matches, and, we talked about the whole, well, what's going on kind of like behind the scenes, and, we'll never hear the full story of it, but, iRemix did play in every playoff map as a main tank for the LA Gladiators, and Gladiators would go on to lose. I was kind of conflicted on this. Like, I think iRemix, given the situation he was put in, I felt like he did serviceable. I definitely feel like out of all the positions, when it comes to free agency, main tank is probably going to be the most sought after one, just because of just the... Well, we always talk about, like, the amount of space that particular position creates, and, Fisher is a prime example of that, because when he came onto the Gladiators, that's when we saw these Gladiators DPS really start to pop off, so I definitely feel like iRemix will find a new home. And Silk Thread, that was kind of an interesting one for me. This was a player that was picked up from the LA Valiants before the start of Stage 3, and he saw the majority of his play in the playoffs, but, like, you have Asher and Silk Thread, who I felt like throughout most of the season, like, yes, there were some consistency issues, but I felt like, all in all, like, I thought that they played enough meta heroes to kind of, like, earn their keep, basically. So, like, out of the lot, like, I have a pretty good feeling these players will be finding a new home, and out of the 3, like, I definitely feel like Silk Thread would probably be the stand-up player out of that lot. But all in all, like, Asher, he played a lot of Tracer, and in these current metas, we're not really seeing a ton of Tracer, so I definitely feel like some players are going to have to expand their hero pools, because finding that specialist for non-meta heroes is going to be kind of a burden, and lessen the likelihood of them getting picked up, even if it is a backup role.
Absolutely. Asher's a tracer one trick in a game that doesn't support one tricking anymore. I mean, we've seen it in the past. players had to make the transition. And we've seen a lot of them do fairly well, but I feel like Asher's going to struggle unless he shows teams that he can play other things. And I think you're absolutely right. I think Silk Thread of these three will be the easiest one to find a team because he can play almost any hero pretty well. Like he can play Hitscan well, he can play Genji well. He's actually a pretty good Widowmaker. I don't know, in comparison to like Surefour or stuff like that. But I think what it came down to with Asher and Silk Thread is when you have Surefour and you have Hydration, there's so much overlap in other DPS that you didn't really need either one of these two. Surefour is a really good Tracer, so you don't need a Tracer one trick when you have a guy who can play Widowmaker, Tracer, Genji at the highest level very well. Especially Widowmaker, and win a 1v1 Widowmaker tournament. So Asher's out of the way. Silk Thread, I don't think ever really had a chance to gel with the team, and he had a lot of overlap with Hydration and Surefour. So I feel like they were kind of like, all right, let's get those out. Let's concentrate on these two. We'll pick up maybe another DPS as a sub, but we'll start fresh and we'll let these two go. Remix, on the other hand, I am gonna completely flip the other side to you. I don't think he'll find another team, at least in the Overwatch League. I feel like people will look at what he did before Fisher came in and they'll say, oh wow, the problem with the Gladiators was Remix. And sure, he did serviceable in the playoffs, but they didn't win the playoffs. So I don't feel like that's enough of a reason to pick him up. I think if anything, he'll be picked up as a sub. I just feel like he had a lot of issues running Winston, and his Reinhardt was not great. I'll temper myself on that one. His Reinhardt was not great. And the new meta, like the way the meta is progressing, we're actually seeing a lot more Orisa, and we didn't get to see him on Orisa that much. So that's another huge question mark where teams are going to be really looking for someone who can play all three of the main tanks. And there's always that hamster ball in the room, so we'll see how that shakes out. So I'm curious to see what the Gladiators do in the main tank role, especially with the way things are going. Like, will they pick up another main tank, or will they try to transition Bishu or Void to main tank? Because both of those players were really, standouts in season 1. So I'm curious to see what the Gladiators do going forward.
Yeah, and for us, like, there was always a big question mark about Void, too, in the sense that, well, Void was really only brought on because of Fisher, and with Fisher gone from the team, like, what does that mean for Void? But I feel like in the most likelihood is, like, I don't see them transitioning, like, Bishu or Void to the other role. To me, that just wouldn't make that much sense. Now, granted, if you do that, it's really hard to keep any sort of synergy on that tank line because those two players aren't playing with one another since they're already covering that same role. So definitely feel like we'll see, maybe a certain sign-in from, the Gladiators Legion. I mean, where's Panker at? They need to move him up. I mean,
I was glad you brought him up because I didn't want to say him. I was like, I'll leave that one for you. But yeah, I and that was kind of where I was going with the hamster ball. I feel like Panker's a pretty good, there's a pretty good chance we'll see him playing for the Gladiators next season.
Can only hope. Because right now it's been kind of like all silent on the Contenders front in regards to call-ups, but that could change within the next week. But moving on, let's talk about our defending Season 1 champions in the London Spitfire. So really, we don't have any roster moves, but we do have a sign-in for their coaching staff. And they have found their new head coach in Coach 815, who has served as the head coach for MVP Space in Apex Season 4, Contenders Season 1, and Contenders Season 2 in Korea. And this is a coach that has a very extensive background in other titles, dating back to StarCraft Brood War. I know he had coached in StarCraft 2, as well as Heroes of the Storm. And, I know a lot of people out there, when they look at this, they're like, well, maybe his track record in Overwatch hasn't been the best, but regardless of what MVP Space has done, Korea is always like cutthroat when it comes to the competition, and FVP Space has always been one of those teams that has been able to go toe to toe with the best. And the fact that he's been able to coach at the highest level across multiple titles is reason enough to give this guy a shot, because really no one has that sort of like tenure when it comes to coaching just out of the gate. Like, it's a very hard fit to find someone as suited to be a coach than someone like Coach 815. So I'm really excited to see this happen. Now, whether or not the coaching staff is going to remain the same with the Spitfire, given, you know, what happened last season, I don't know. But I feel like with this, we are going to see a lot more consistencies with the London Spitfire throughout Season 2.
Yeah, for real. I mean, this is what they needed. Like, they went out and they said, we need a coach that has, you know, a long track record of being a coach, knows how to handle players, knows how to handle a team setting to bring London together. Because basically what London did is they piggybacked off their talent, which is immense, which is why they won. They had, you know, the most talented team going into the league. It's why we, before Season 1, pegged them as the number one team. And lo and behold, they came out at the end through, you know, ups and downs and became the number one team. So they took a step back. The leadership of London took a step back, and they said, all right, look, we don't necessarily need the most seasoned Overwatch coach. We know how to play Overwatch. We have guys that know Overwatch at the highest level. We need someone that is a coach that can keep these guys from getting at each other's throats, squash any ego, squash any, you know, inner team drama, stuff like that, which, based on what we saw through Season 1, we know what's going on. We know there was problem with coaching. We know there was problem with ego. That's going to happen when you take two top tier teams and smash them together and everyone wants to be a starter. That's just going to happen. And the coaching staff for London wasn't prepared for that. So that was their turmoil. I can almost 100% say that's why they had turmoil Season 1. So that's why they went for this. And this is absolutely the right choice for all those reasons I just mentioned. I feel like this actually almost kicked London up to the top of who is the most scary going into Season 2 for me, because this was exactly what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for, you know, a Tyrong. I wasn't looking for a wizard. I was looking for a coach, and this guy has the tenure to do it.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought up Wizard, because we can't talk about the New York Excelsior without talking about Wizard Hyun, because Wizard is actually parted ways with the New York Excelsior and is looking for a team. So, you know, this leaves New York Excelsior with just two coaches on their staff. Obviously, they still have Pavane as the head coach and Zet, who is the assistant coach. And in regards to, you know, the victims of the free agency period for the NYXL, only Janice has been released from New York. So Janice had served as, you know, the kind of like backup main tank for the roster. He was also part of that luxury Watch Blue core that, you know, New York had built around. Can't say that I'm really surprised. Janice was always kind of like he would be brought in just so, you know, Mono could have a bit of a breather. And, you know, for the most part, like, I think Janice did pretty good considering the situation he was in. Obviously, you know, he had one of the best teams behind him, and he brought a different approach to the game, which I felt like differentiated enough between him and Mono. So, like, Janice is another one of those players, like, I feel like there's a good chance he'll get picked up. Whether it's going to be the actual main tank or kind of in that substitute role, I'm not sure, but really no surprise to see that New York is trying to stick to their guns with a lineup that they already have, because we already know some of the players that they have in the wait-in with XL2 Academy, who, by the way, is going to be playing in the Contenders NA Finals, which also happens to be this weekend when they're going up against, you know, a certain team that I'm sporting, Fusion Uni. And, you know, we'll also see a certain Team USA member play, also from that squad. But I'm so curious to just see what New York's plan is with the star caliber DPS that they have currently and also on that academy team, because you have to feel like there's a lot of trade bait. They could literally go out and get just about anyone they want, as long as they dangle a little carrot, on a stick in front of anyone. Like, they can grab basically any player.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see if they have any trades or if they have anything we don't know about in the wings yet. Because, like you said, they can get anything and anybody they want. So while Janice going out to free agency isn't super surprising, I will agree with you that I feel like he is good enough to warrant at least teams to look at him. And sure, he was kind of the tank they put in to throw maps, but he did really well on those maps. Like, most of those maps were lost in seconds or inches. Like, it wasn't like, when I say he was put into throw maps, that's just statistically what he looked like when you look at wins and losses. But other than that, he is actually a very good main tank. So I feel like he will at least get looked at. Whereas I remix before, I have a feeling it might be tougher for him. Wizard, however, he will definitely be picked up by somebody. Like, I feel like this release is actually just a precursor to him getting picked up, much like how we saw the Fisher deal go down. Like, I feel like he just got a better offer somewhere, and he will be a main coach somewhere. He's too smart. He knows Overwatch too well that any of these expansion teams coming in that didn't look at him would have been a huge mistake. That's, just go watch 20 minutes of any of his videos and you'll see this guy thinks about Overwatch so differently that it warrants him being a coach for somebody.
Absolutely. So moving on, let's take a look at the runner-ups from last season, that being the Philadelphia Fusion. And the Fusion have actually dropped 3 players from their roster. They had Dayfly, Joe Meister, and Shadowburn no longer being part of the team. So Dayfly and Joe Meister both saw limited play, as Fusion opted to play more in favor of Boombox and Neptuno throughout the season. Obviously, we always bring up Neptuno having been the kind of like the Iron Man of the Overwatch League, having played the most maps. And Shadowburn competed as the team's DPS in all of Stage 1, but, Ikiro basically got play the rest of the season. But, Shadowburn, without question, is going to get picked up. Like, he's too good of a projectile player not to get signed. Are there any teams in particular that you feel like need to sign Shadowburn for a start-in roster spot right now?
Not necessarily any of the existing teams. Dallas might want to look at a projectile specialist since they lost Seagull, who kind of turned into Diva anyway. But off the top of my head, there's no one that really jumps out. But I feel like the expansion teams will be heavily looking at him. Joe Meister, depending on what we see in the World Cup, could definitely get picked up. Dayfly, I think, will probably go to contenders if he doesn't retire, because what little we saw of him was not good. I mean, it was so bad that it actually cured Neptuno of his ailments enough that he could play. So I think you're right to focus on Shadowburn. And Shadowburn, he's hard to quantify, because Shadowburn is one of those few players that has such like a clutch or pop-off potential that you never quite know when he's going to show up. I mean, if you watch any of the World Cup from the first qualifier, you see that it was basically like, put all our eggs in Shadowburn's basket and hope that he does what he needs to do. And he almost did it. Like, that's the crazy part. So I feel like Shadowburn will absolutely get picked up. Whether existing teams look at him or stuff like that, I can't think of any off the top of my head where he would fit in well, because he absolutely deserves to be a starter. Dallas was the one that comes to mind. Depending on maybe what some kind of trades and stuff go, I may change my mind on that. But for now, I think he's going to be heavily targeted by expansion teams.
Yeah, SDB definitely has that X factor, I think would be the best way to put it. But moving on, we got to talk about the Seoul Dynasty. Slambo's not here to talk about this, unfortunately, but Dynasty have made some more moves. So first up, let's talk about Gambler. This is one of their support players. Gambler has actually retired from professional Overwatch to pursue streaming with the Dynasty's parent company, Gen G Esports. So he's still part of the organization, but, moving to that streamer part of that role. And this is a player that had joined the Dynasty back in Stage 2 and saw the bulk of his play throughout the second half of the season, playing as Toby's backup. But on top of that, Soul have made some other roster adjustments by releasing 3 other players. They had released Wakid, Miro, and Guido. So, oh man, like, I'm gonna have a lot of thoughts about this. As a Lunatic High fanboy, this is a team that I followed for a long time. Miro and Guido were both players that originated back to those, OG Lunatic High days. Miro was really the player that had put Winston on the map at that time, because really no one was playing Winston, and then everyone saw the crazy things that Miro was able to do with Winston, and then we just saw Winston play, basically just evolve from that point on. Now, that being said, we've seen the great, and we've also seen the bad part of that, because a lot of teams have basically learned the playbook that Miro had and could basically know what he was going to do in the situations that he was put in. So there were a lot of times where they would just know exactly how to deal with the situation at hand, and we saw, kind of like that fall off from Miro as the season progressed. Now, that being said, they also had Kuki on the roster, who was also one of their main tank players, and he hasn't been cut or anything. We're still waiting to hear more about their affiliate team. But it seems a little weird to me that they would release one and just not both. But it definitely feels like kind of like a closing of the guard in a sense when it comes to this, original Lunatic High roster. But on top of the roster changes, we can confirm that KDG, formerly of Mosaic Esports and Snakes, is going to serve as the team's new head coach, and Shane, formerly of the London Spitfire, is going to serve as an assistant coach. So, as I expected, Shane, the
Nailed
former Busan coach, goes to the Seoul Dynasty. So, gonna dig up a little bit of dirt, tell him, some of the things, some of the weak spots that they were exposing in, those 16 or however god many maps it was in a row that Busan absolutely crushed Lunatic High, and even the Dynasty, with the Spitfire. But all in all, we know this is not going to be the end of the Dynasty's cuts. It's rumored that Zephyr might also be on the chopping block, but Dynasty have made a ton of movements. We're expecting better things, hopefully something to live truer to their name. But all in all, I can't say that I was overly surprised by the current moves that they have made.
No, I mean, when you have Fisher, one of the tanks is going to go. And I hate to say it, I actually agree that Miro was the right tank to cut if they want to keep Kuki. Because Kuki, while he wasn't necessarily as good as Winston, he was a much better Reinhardt player than Miro was. And this goes back to what I said earlier. It's a meta where you can't get away with playing one hero anymore. So I love Miro. I loved watching him play Winston, but it's true. Over the past season, we've definitely seen a huge dip. And Wakid just was outshined in every category by Fleta. Like, if you have Fleta, you don't need Wakid. That's as simple as it is. They also still have Munchkin, so DPS wise, they're actually setting themselves up to be pretty good. So, and with Fisher there to create the room, I feel like Dynasty's making the right moves. I mean, Zephyr, okay, he can go. Like, what is he really gonna do? I feel like, of the things left, like the question marks for this team, we really need to know what they're gonna do with the support line. Like, I was curious to see Guido go, even though he never really wowed me. I feel like he was something they could have built upon, because Ryu Jaehong is like the rock that you would expect them to keep building around. but I honestly don't know how much longer he's going to keep playing, at least at this level. I feel like he's going to be one of those that we can peg kind of moving to a coaching role, just based on, some of the rumblings we've heard. Toby really didn't do that great in season. Like he had his, moments here and there, but he never really got a huge chance to shine on Lucio, which I feel like maybe they're looking at the meta and they're saying, okay, well, if it continues as it is, Lucio's going to be around, so maybe we should keep him. But I'm really curious to see what they're going to do from the support lineup at this point, because I feel like, I hate to say it, I feel like that's their weak point right now. Ryu Jae-hong's a great Ana player and she's coming back, so maybe they're just banking on maybe riding that out, which I don't necessarily think would be the right call. I feel like you kind of need to future proof yourselves a little better. So maybe they'll call up someone from the tier 2 scene. Maybe they have a Jonak off the ladder waiting. Like who knows? We'll see how these coaches play out. But I'm keeping a close eye on the dynasty because I feel like they're getting there, but they're not quite there. That like how I feel for like London and some of these other teams. And this next team that you want to talk about is nowhere near there because they can't even field a whole team right now.
No, I mean, they only have 3 players on their roster. So the Shanghai Dragons, as expected, have, maybe I shouldn't say as expected. I was a little surprised by the amount of cuts. Okay, so one of these was definitely a surprise compared to the other 9 members, including staff. Okay, so I'll say this. Only 3 players are currently on the Shanghai Dragons. You have Fearless, Gagiri, and Dia. So we have 10 members in total being cut from the Dragons, 8 of which are players, 2 of which are on the coaching staff. So released from the team in regards to the players, we have Otto, Alterine, Damon, Five King, Free Kill, Roshan, Sky, and Zushu. And then from the coaching staff, they let go of their coach Khan, as well as their analyst, Nai 8. So, what does that mean for their coaching staff? Well, right now, the only one on that coaching staff is the former Miraculous Youngster support player Creed, who had served as the assistant coach for the Dragons last season. So, now the big question mark. Otto is cut. I feel like when we're talking about the Dragons, the DPS in most situations was not really the issue. So Otto was kind of like a head-scratcher for me. I know Roshan has been practicing a lot of English. I don't know if that's the case for a lot of their Chinese players. But all in all, like, Dragons were definitely like one of the story teams of the first season, just due to the fact that, they were struggling to piece things together. We all thought that maybe with the restructure, bringing in some Korean flair to the team would have been enough, but, there were a lot of growing pains, and, a lot of like question marks in regards to the communication, and definitely hit some rough patches throughout the entirety of the season. But we got glimmers of hope, mostly off of the back of the tank line. Now, that being said, that is a lot of cuts. We don't have that many players and coaches on the staff anymore. Now, the real question is, are Shanghai going to stick to their guns, saying, like, okay, we want to stick to a national-type team, or are we going to go to a Korean team based off of who they currently have on their roster? Like, I don't know which way they're going, but I think they will shy more away from just running the Chinese players at this point.
Yeah, I think they kind of learned their lesson the first time. Like, I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe one of the expansion Chinese teams try to do it again, just to kind of prove a point. Like, oh, maybe we can field a better team if we do better. But I feel like for the Dragons, they're gonna do a mixed team, if not a Korean team. I feel like at this point, the owners of the Dragons are like, we need to win something, so we will do whatever we need to win. And I think the players that they kept, I think, were the right choices. Otto is questionable, but I still feel like the more you clean house in this situation, the better. So I feel like maybe giving him room to sign on another team was the right decision. Same thing with Sky. I feel like Sky will be picked up because while he did struggle in the Overwatch League, that could just be due to the setting that he was playing in, because he's actually a very good player. I feel like he has the room to play in the Overwatch League. It was just, it's kind of like Gagiri and Fearless. That I feel like on any other team, they could have been put into a team and won games. It's just as a whole, the clock was not running, so it doesn't matter what the individual cogs were doing, how great of play they were playing. So, and Dia, you could absolutely say the same thing. Dia, I think, needs the most coaching of the three that are left, because he had a tendency to try to do everything himself, and you can't do that in the Overwatch League. Like, sure, the Pine flanks are fun to watch, but they work because Pine has a team behind him. Whereas if you just stand behind a team long enough, they're going to turn around and kill you. So I feel like this is the right choice for them. I'm curious to see what they do from here, but I can't really make any like assumptions because there's not enough of a team. They could field a 3v3 lockout team if they wanted to and do pretty well, but we'll see what Shanghai does from here.
Okay, so when I look at this team, okay, let me rephrase this. When I look at that region, okay, the best team in China are Korean. That would be Lucky Future Zenith. They've been the ones winning everything. There's also T1W, who have been making a pretty big splash. So if they want to go the Chinese route, that's who you should pick up. Now, I'm not certain on the age of all the players on those rosters, but if I was going to restructure the Dragons or even this Guangzhou team, I would definitely look at those two teams in particular. But yeah, Dragons basically just like, no one was safe, given the results of Season 1. But anyways, we gotta move on. We gotta talk a little bit about contenders, and this will kind of tie into our first main discussion, which will focus on one of these players. So let's talk about one of the affiliated teams for the Boston Uprising, that being Toronto Esports. And they've actually acquired Color Hex from Sydney Drop Bears. So this marks the first signing of an Oceanic player for an NA organization since 2016. It's been a while. And Color Hex had joined the Drop Bears after having played for Masterminds GC in Contenders Season 1 Australia. And he is the first player from New Zealand to join an NA org. And he's actually the only player from Oceania to play for an academy team. So, not too many Oceanic players in the Overwatch League. There's Custa. There's also, some casters. But this is an awesome sign-in, and, when I saw this announcement, I'm like, okay, we were kind of talking about, okay, what are we going to talk about next week? We had Australia wrapping up, we had South America wrapping up, and then this news hit, and I'm like, 100% we are covering Australia because, I pretty much knew Drop Bears winning was going to be a done deal. Sure enough, that did happen, but you kind of got your first look at Color Hex in these playoffs, so I want to get your thoughts on him as a player, just based off of what you saw in regards to, a first impression.
Get used to hearing his name tonight, because we're going to be talking a lot about him in the coming probably half an hour, because I don't want to say he single-handedly won it for the Drop Bears, but he definitely had a huge part in it. Regardless of what he was playing, I actually feel like he deserves to be on an Overwatch League team at this point, because just some of the stuff he was doing on Pharah was phenomenal. But then he would switch to Widowmaker and just destroy the other teams. He was so flexible. Actually, all of the Drop Bears were pretty flexible. But he was so flexible that he is the kind of player that teams will be looking for. And it really showed that there's a lot of untapped potential down there. So if this Melbourne team becomes a possibility, we may be discussing another full homegrown team coming into the Overwatch League. I actually feel like they have a pretty good shot of doing pretty well. I would put them in the same category as Brazil Gaming House. They're such a tight knit unit down there that it could absolutely create a top 5 team. So Color Hex, I think, was just the first of many that we're going to be hearing about, moving forward. And if we get that Melbourne team, then obviously it's going to be a lot more, because I feel like they're definitely going to be looking for a lot of local talent. But if not, I'm sure we'll see a lot more of these people be picked up.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about the Contenders Australia playoffs in our first main discussion, and then we'll move on to preview the upcoming group stage for the Overwatch World Cup in Los Angeles. So first up, we saw the Sydney Drop Bears defeat Conga Esports. That was 3-0. We also saw Dark-Sided defeat Order 3-2. And then, we'll talk about the Grand Finals, which was actually a rematch of last season's Contenders AU Grand Finals, which was also the same case in South America. So it just kind of shows you that when it comes to the top teams in those particular regions, it's pretty clear who the top dogs are. So in regards to the Drop Bears versus Conga Esports, like, there was a certain thing that happened in Map 2, which I still cannot wrap my head around, and it was definitely a flub on production, right? So there was an incident when it came to the map pick for map number 2. So basically, they end up selecting the wrong map, and the teams end up playing said map to its completion before they went to the correct map following the break. Now, the Drop Bears still ended up taking that map, and eventually the series, but how in the world does that even happen in the first place? Yes, I can understand if production, like, misclicks or something, but how do you go on to proceed to complete the wrong map in its entirety without some sort of communication being done? Like, I don't get it, Spider. Like,
I don't understand it either. Like, that's such like an erroneous error. Like, it's huge when you talk about stuff to happen in professional play. Like, that is probably up there with one of the worst things you could do. And the fact that they just played it out made it, I don't know if it made it better or if it made it worse.
mm-hmm.
Like, it's hard to tell, because if they stopped it like immediately, like say they opened the gates and then immediately stopped it, I feel like they could have been like, oh, we had a production error, this wasn't the map that was supposed to be true. They could have just played it off like it, a small thing. But the fact that they played it to completion definitely said, like, internally they were like, oh crap, we picked the wrong map, we don't know what to do, oh no, they've played too long, just let them play it out, we'll deal with it afterwards. And you can tell the casters were like, to their part, they casted the game, but you could tell, like, they just in their voice that they were a little uneasy, because they knew, like, they knew something was going on. So it was entertaining to watch, but from a player standpoint, I would have been pissed regardless of which team I was on. Like, because you prepped for certain maps, you did all this work, and then you're playing a map, and then you don't know if it counts, you don't know what they're going to do, you don't know what the judging is going to be on it. Like, I'm sure they filled them in pretty well, and the fact that the Drop Bears took it made things a little bit better. But if Kanga had taken it, that would have put a whole different spin on it. Like, that could have changed the whole dynamic of the series. So don't do that again. Like, just don't, like, double, triple check. Like, if you have to, ask the players, like, what map are we supposed to be playing? Like, there's so many fail safes in this situation that I don't know why they didn't take advantage of it. But that game as a whole, like, it was fairly one-sided. Drop Bears basically walked over Kanga, regardless of if they were supposed to be playing on the map or not.
Yeah, but like, I just thought it was funny though. So Sydney Drop Bears are technically the first team to win a best of 5 with the score of 4-0. Because they did take all the maps, regardless of if it was the right one or not. But I want to talk about a specific thing that happened on Keynes Row. Because there was this crazy, intense back and forth fight. One of the most, like, insane fights that I can recall recently anyway. And the Drop Bears had opened up a fight with the Coalescence, and then that was met with an EMP from Locust. So we end up seeing Graviton searches coming out from both sides of the field, And throughout all of this going on, Locust ends up being the sole survivor to win the fight for Kenga. And, like, I was just, like, in awe. I'm like, how the heck did that happen? And that was not the only time in these AU series that we saw things kind of out of the ordinary, because we saw a little bit of creativity with Team Cops in that second series. But, man, like, that Kings Row map and that one fight, I was like, okay, like, this is what you can expect to see when you tune in to Contenders Australia. Like, sometimes shit just hits the fan. Sometimes we get, like, these very prolonged fights because, yes, we had way too many times where it was goats versus goats, and no one would die.
I like goats versus goats.
And, you know, it would go into, you know, the second series of Earth Shatters, and then finally someone would win and, you know, secure the point, things like that. But it was hectic, it was pure mayhem, and I was loving every second of it.
Yeah, I mean, that play basically speaks to the power of Sombra, and Sombra translocates out and comes back and everybody's dead. Like, what? Where did it? I dropped EMP and I expected results, but damn, this is a whole nother level of what I expected. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of goats in the foreseeable future. I think actually this Contender series was the start of teams figuring out the anti-goats, which we'll go into when we talk about the finals.
So moving on, looking at the other semifinals match, we saw Darkseid defeat Order with a score of 3-2. We got to talk about Temple of Anubis. You know, this is my favorite map to talk about, and I am okay with it in this instance because we saw something out of the ordinary, right? So Order, they're on the attack, and what do they come out with? But Attack, Bastion, and Symmetra. Like, so yeah, we saw, you know, the teleport play, and it took a little bit of time, roughly 2 minutes, but it worked. Like, it actually worked.
Yep.
And I was shocked by that. And, you know, of course, you know, Reddit was all over it. But, like, I honestly can't remember another instance where I remember someone trying the new Symmetra and the Bastion on attack, at least off the top of my head. So when I saw that happen, I was like, this is gonna happen. And I was certain, like, there's no way this is going to work. I thought Darkseid would shut it down. That did not happen. And it's moments like that where it just comes to show, like, this is something that, you know, was definitely a pocket strat. It was a ballsy move, and it paid off. So sometimes, you know, weird calls can bring the results that you want. Other times it will just get slammed right in your face. But in this instance for Order, it did work, and the home crowd definitely ate that up because that is not something you're used to seeing. You're probably not going to see it again anytime soon, but it was something to behold.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've been waiting for. When we saw the new Symmetra come out, we were like, oh man, teleporting Bastion around, this is going to be great. And then nobody's really tried it, and then they ran out. And I was surprised that they stuck with it so long, because that's definitely a strat that you would think you would be like, one, it doesn't work, switch, let's go to something traditional. No, they to their credit, they were like, no, we're gonna make this work. Like, we're gonna make this work whether we win or lose, and it worked. I mean, I was surprised, but that's everything I wanted it to be. I mean, as soon as it started working, the crowd went crazy. Like, everybody went nuts. Like, you could just see, like, the kills rolling in, and everybody was like, this is amazing. This is what we've been waiting for. And, you know, while I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, so that's how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to keep teleporting from, you know, rooftop to rooftop.
Exactly.
Just raining bullets down below on the point. But we have got to talk about Rialto. And, you know, I thought the King's roleplay was nutty, but this could potentially go down as the clutchest play in Overwatch. So, Darkseid got the better of this exchange, but Order had this map in the bag. Like, they were going to take the map, which would have won them the series. So Order engage with an EMP and Dragon Blade combination, which results in a team wipe. And they are just meters away from getting the map to take the series. You know, the staggers are coming in from Darkseid. Order are still getting to the cleanup. And then the Graviton Surge comes out. And then Punk just hits a massive self-destruct, which ends up finding 3 kills and a D-mech, and Darksided hang on by the skin of their teeth, which would force a map 5 in the situation. But when I saw that, like, I had to do a double take. I'm like, did they just win that? How the hell does that happen? But man, like, I was just in awe of that play actually happening, because I for sure thought, okay, they're just gonna cruise, ease it in, and that was gonna be the end of it. And then when I saw them controlling, the respawns, I was like, okay, that has to be it. And then sure enough, Turbo comes in with the Graviton, and lo and behold, we're going to a map 5.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happened. There's not much you can really say outside of what you described it. You really have to go and watch it and watch the micro plays on it, because the order in which they kill, the order in which Darksided kill order to basically maintain control of the point is probably some of the best micro play I've ever seen. Like that, it was so laser focused. It was so like just the way that they were able to control the whole flow of the fight and then eventually close it out was phenomenal. So, and actually this whole series was defined by micro plays. Like as good as the final was, I would actually recommend going back and watching Darksided versus Order. Because a lot of the final just comes down to goats versus goats and who outgoats the other goats. But there was a lot of counterplay. There was a lot of different picks. There was a lot of, like I said, micro plays. Plus, there's Bastion Symmetra. So I would absolutely go back and watch this. But yeah, the end of Rialto, and the fact that it was like it's so close to the spawn for both sides. Like it was point A. So you're like, wait, that's as far as they made it, and that's how they won. Wait, what? So yeah, definitely go back and watch this one. It was phenomenal. And I'm going to talk about Punk a little bit later, but he is another one that I feel like we may see make it across the pond.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of value out of the self-destructs throughout all of the series for Punk. But moving on, let's talk about the Grand Finals, which, as I mentioned, was a rematch from last season of Contenders Australia. So we got Sydney Drop Bears going up against Darksided, and this one went 5 maps in the best of 7. With Sydney Drop Bears getting the victory with a score of 4-1 and repeating as the AU champions. So we would open up on Lijiang Tower, and this one would go all 3 rounds. So we opened up, and both sides were opting to run Hammond. We got to see a ton of hamster play in this, which I was happy to see. And Drop Bears ended up finding the Darksided support line, with Color Hex finding a 4K to secure the first point. And Darksided ended up flipping a point at 86%. And the Drop Bears at this time weren't really having to invest much of their ult economy. Turbo ends up finding the Pharmacy with a close range barrage with the Pharah, which ended up forcing the Drop Bears to regroup. So Color Hex is able to escape a self-destruct attempt in the air, but he's not able to escape Turbo, who just rockets him with direct rocket hits, which feels bad, man. Trying to, move around, just trying to avoid an ult, only to still get caught out by something else. We did see Quats finding both the supports with the Minefield, which ended up flipping the point back for the Drop Bears at 99%. So Moody ends up popping the Primal Rage, looking to stall things out for Darksided, but the Barrage and Self-Destruct combo comes out from the Drop Bears to secure the round. Moving on to round 2, we saw a Kraken fall off the edge to open up the map for Drop Bears. There were a couple of times where someone would randomly fall off the map, and it wasn't, an environmental kill. So I don't know exactly what happened in those instances. Maybe it was a fat finger and they just fell off. Something like that. I don't know.
Sometimes if you get booped and you hit a ledge before you hit the death point, sometimes it will not count as an environmental. It could be weird things. There was also a couple of times that not necessarily this point, but I think at third point, Zarya blew herself up because she was so charged and she aimed down and blew herself up. So this was definitely a killing yourself kind of map.
Yeah, the ground is not your friend in most instances. But so round two, we saw Darksided get the initial cap. After a Kraken fell off the map. One mishap, and that pretty much seals the first control. We saw Cantus getting caught with a direct rocket as he tried to fly across the map with the Guardian Angel, and Color Hex follows up by finding Molotov right after with another direct rocket hit. Darksided do an awesome job in regards to stalling out for an extensive percentage. It was almost 40% that they were able to maintain this, and Drop Bears eventually are able to flip the point at 85%. So we see Drop Bears pushing forward, trying to gain as much percentage as they can. Darksided end up coming in with all of the ultimates in their economy, finding open and pick on a Kraken. We see Turmo finding Shoyo with the Barrage, and Darksided flip the point back at 57%, where Punk finds Color Hex with a Self-Destruct to secure the round for Darksided, which forces that round 3. And of course, sure enough, we get goats on both sides, and Quats actually gets the first shatter in the fight, but the follow-up is just not there. Obviously, with goats, there is a ton of sustained, and not always a follow-up. You need a lot of things to happen in order to actually, obtain those eliminations. So Mooney ends up dropping the counter shatter, and Punk finds Bertlog with the self-destruct. And then we see the second shatter being dropped by Quats, and the Drop Bears end up winning that war of attrition to get that initial capture. So, in typical GOATS fashion, we see a Graviton coming out, this time by Gradation on the Drop Bears. The follow-up isn't there, and we see Yuki on the Brigitte just laying in the work for Darksided, and they're able to flip the point at 40%. Drop Bears are the first to the punch with the Earth Shatter, and Mooney is the first to fall. Drop Bears end up winning the fight and flipping the point back at 55%, and basically, I will just sum round 3 up with this. You would win a fight, and then you would lose the next fight, and you would lose the point. And that happened the entire round. I don't understand how that exactly works. Is there a reason that happens? Is it just a matter of you maintaining the better ult economy in that fight, or is it something else?
Well, it's going to play heavily into map 2, and it's because Goats is terrible at defense. Goats is all about running into the team at full speed and just taking them down. So the initial fight was dictated by just how many ults each team could generate and how fast and how many they could throw out. And that's basically how it was won. And then if you look at that, after that, every time a defending team had to defend with Goats, they lost. Because Goats is not they're good at Goats is good at standing its ground, but it's not good at winning that fight while it's standing its ground, because the whole point is to run into a team, create some disorganization, and then pick them off one by one. Now, when it's Goats versus Ghosts, it's basically just run into each other and hope you win. But I see a lot of people hate watching Goats. I really like Goats versus Goats because it's just pure utter chaos, and that's when you can pick out the micro plays. You can pick out the little things, like you can say, "Oh well, this is Brigitte Shield Bash won them that fight. This Graviton on the wall won them that fight." So that kind of stuff. But as a whole, the Drop Bears really on this map, the biggest thing that kept them in this map was Color Hex, regardless of what hero he was on. He was phenomenal on Pharah. He was phenomenal on Zarya. He was just good all around. So the problem is they just really didn't stick to their guns for what they needed to counter Darkseid. Yeah, I almost said Order because I'm still thinking about the last game. But yeah, Darksided. So Darksided do walk away with this, but I think they kind of spent their mojo on this one.
Yeah, and it definitely was partially Drop Bears not sticking to that Goats counter, but Darksided did block a shatter, which definitely helped them secure things late in that fight, and off of that they basically were able to flip the point at 99%. And, that was the end of that. But moving on to map 2, we move to Eichenwalde. So Darksided was on the attack first, and, they opted to go on attack, which I thought was interesting. But we saw Punk finding Color Hex early on, but Dark ended up losing Mooney. Right after that, a Kraken wasn't able to translocate out because he was on the Sombra on this point, and Darksided ended up getting the numbers advantage in the fight. Yuki ends up finding Color Hex again, so not the best opening for Color Hex in this map in particular, but Darksided are able to handle the respawns to secure the first objective. So in true Eichenwalde fashion, we saw swaps coming out on the attack. Well, really both sides. We saw Color and Tradition move to, double sniper. So Color moved to Widow, Tradition was on the Hanzo. Color Hex ends up finding Molotov early after that swap. Yuki comes in with the EMP, but Darksided just aren't able to capitalize off of it. Turmo ends up sniping Color Hex, and Bertlog ends up falling, so no resurrect available at that point in time, so Turmo just continues to find some key picks before getting focused down after he gets dove on. Quats ends up trying to separate Darksided and their supports with a minefield because he was playing Hammond. But the problem was the drop bears were not on the point, which allowed Darksided to get to that second objective. So we see both sides opting to run Goats 4.3. And one by one, the kills are going in favor of Darksided. Quats finds a huge shatter, and with the respawn advantage, drop bears are able to take the fight. So we see Gravitons coming out from both sides, and Molotov's Transcendence keeps Dark alive in the fight. They rally up and clean up everyone around the payload to complete the map with 26 seconds left. And this one was one that went to time bank, so just keep that in mind. Drop bears are on the attack now. Darksided end up giving 2 ticks really early on, and Gradation's Dragon Strike ends up finding one of the tanks. So, drop bears get the first objective on a stalled out first engage, so, probably not as quick as they'd like to. It was a little bit slower than Darksided's attack, but still a pretty good time overall. We see Color Hex swap to Genji at this point, 4.2. That was mostly to deal with Turmo, who had moved over to the Widowmaker, which we see time and time again point to on the defense here. Drop bears end up getting a lot of free push, and Punk's self-destruct ends up finding Bertlog to stop the bears' push. So we see a Kraken getting a key pick on Cantus to open things up for the drop bears. Molotov falls down right after Cantus, and the drop bears don't have to invest anything in the fight. So Color Hex comes in, ends up drawing the Dragon Blade, finds the support line of Darksided, and the drop bears are able to secure the second objective. And of course, we get Goats v Goats to close out the map. We see both Brigitas fall early. Punk ends up getting a key pick with a self-destruct, again, finding the value there. Gets the Mercy player. But Shoyo answers right back with a 2k destruct of his own, which allows the drop bears to reach that final turn of the map. The Shatter doesn't find anyone, and the drop bears are being kept up by a Coalescence. So we see the Saw picks coming out from Darksided, but the drop bears are getting the cleanup that they need, and actually finish the map barely. Like, it was 0.4 seconds left before overtime was going to kick in, and that in itself kept them in it, because had they completed in overtime, we might have seen, a different result in this. But moving into the time bank, we have the drop bears up first. We saw Darksided opt to run Goats on the defense. So drop bears look to counter this with Pharah and Sombra. So we see Color Hex getting free shots in as the drop bears get an early tick. Molotov goes down, which allows drop bears to secure the second tick, and then Darksided just crumble, and then drop bears secure the first objective in overtime. Now we see the EMP investment, and the drop bears end up taking down both of the Darksided supports, and basically, like, drop bears, they cruise through the map. At one point, we see them drop, 3 ultimates, and, they drop the EMP, the supports fall, Moody tries to answer back. He actually gets a pretty big Winston play, ends up getting a 3k, but Quats, answers right back with a minefield. But Mooney just like is just primal rage, and he gets a DMAC, another pick, and that's finally what stabilizes Darksided on the defense. But to make that much progress in overtime, granted they didn't complete the map, but to make it as far as they did was a very steep win condition, which was just too much for Darksided to overcome. And really, like, it was just all they needed was an EMP for the Drop Bears defense to secure it. And of course, Color Hex was the one finding the final kills with the barrage when overtime burnt out. But all in all, like, again, like, we see Darksided stick to goats. And this occasion, it didn't work. But, I thought it's interesting that, they tried to stick to their guns. Didn't always work out. But it just felt like... I felt like in the current meta that we're in, and this is something like we've seen time and time again, you can't just stick to running one thing. And that was definitely exposed by the Drop Bears.
You also can't run that thing on defense. Stop running goats on defense. It doesn't work. That's not what it's there for. And this absolutely proves that point. But this is the map that I really want to talk about Punk, because Punk was phenomenal on this map. Like, Color Hex did a lot of work, but he could have did a whole lot more had Punk not been in his face the whole time. Like, Punk was constantly shutting down barrages, rockets, like anything he could do. Punk was making sure of it that he Color Hex couldn't do the work that he needed to. So this and actually Rialto are the two maps that really kind of solidified me that Punk really needs to find a home on an Overwatch League team. But all in all, man, when a map comes down to 0.4 seconds, it's a phenomenal map. So honestly, I think the thing that hurt Darksided the most is, sure, they did opt to run goats on the last stage of their first attack, which I actually think is a good idea for that point. Goats is actually very good on that point. The problem is they waited too long to switch to it. And, it's kind of counter to my previous argument and your argument of not always sticking to goats. But that is the one point on this map where goats works really well, because it is so tight. There are, minor flank routes where goats can come in and swing around and do some cheeky things. But they stuck to their guns and tried to stick out their initial comp, and it just didn't work. So then eventually they did switch, but it was kind of too little too late. And sure, they did complete the map with some time bank, 26 seconds, but they rolled into that point with a lot of time, and they kind of wasted it away. And that, I don't want to take anything away from the Drop Bears. It was a phenomenal defense on that point, but I feel like Darksided had everything they needed to take that point in a more timely manner, and I feel like that might have given them enough to kind of stop the Drop Bears of the next go around, whereas they were feeling kind of defeated that they went into third point with so much time and then walked out with 26 seconds. So who knows mentally what that did to them. But overall, this was a phenomenal map. And if you want to see probably one of the best overtime pushes we've seen in a while, it's not going to touch like a Junkertown overtime push where we get to see multiple full map pushes. But this is up there for me.
Absolutely. So moving on to map 3, we went to Volskaya Industries, and Darksided were on the attack first. No surprise, they stuck with goats. We saw Drop Bears opting for Soldier 76 and Doomfist on the defense.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought initially too. I was like, okay, the Doomfist I was okay with, because like I love seeing Doomfist up against goats. The Soldier, like, to me, I don't know how I feel about Soldier.
Soldier is really, really good against Hammond. People don't understand how good against Hammond he really is, because he has sustain that he can go toe-to-toe with Hammond. I actually found this out when I did my placements for last season, because I actually play a lot of Soldier and I haven't been able to. And I kind of pulled him out because I was like, all right, I'm going to go to a comfort pick. He is really, really good against Hammond. So if you expect a Hammond and you're a halfway decent Soldier, he could work. Now, him and Doomfist together is an odd pairing, but I can make an argument for Soldier.
Okay. Yeah, it was one of those scenes where at first I was like, is this the thing? Like, like
Yeah.
so it kind of threw me for a loop there. But we do see Color Hex being the first to fall. But it's okay, because Jordation has his back. He gets the DMech onto Punk. Quats ends up falling to a whip shot, and Dark has the positional advantage on the point. So we see the tactical visor coming out from Jordation, and the drop bearers are able to bring the fight back, but, they do give up a tick in that engage. So we see changes coming out from Dark-Sided, who bring out, they swap to like a Tracer, they bring out a Pharah, as well as Hammond, and Dark-Sided look to dive the high ground, and Turmo and Yuki find all of the cleanup that they need, and Dark are able to secure the first point with 5:20 left on the clock. So we see Dark have to regroup after losing their main tank and Mercy early on. But it's okay, because they're coming in with ultimates. They have 5 ults in their bank for the next engage. But they keep losing players early, which allows the drop bears to continue to kind of push forward and move them back to spawn. So we see a lot of low economy type fights continuing for the drop bears defense. Who, they take the next fight, only invest in a Primal Rage. Dark end up swapping back to Goats with about 2 minutes left on the clock. They rally up and end up picking off Jordation. Dark end up finding 4 crucial picks, and we see Jordation move over to the Doomfist again. He ends up getting a Meteor Strike on top of Molotov, and Quats drop some mines. But we see Punk answering back again with the Self-Destruct, find a ton of value, gets another 2 kill. Cantus ends up finding both of the drop bear supports players with the Lucio, which you gotta love seeing. And Dark end up completing the map. Again, close, 1.7 seconds left on the clock. So, moving over to the drop bears attack. Dark-Sided again, running Goats on their defense. Drop bears opt to run Sombra Doomfist on their attack. So Dark-Sided end up winning the first fight, but the drop bears have the ult advantage. We see the EMP coming out from Color Hex, which is met with a sound barrier. Molotov ends up being the first one to fall, and Cantus goes down to a self-destruct, and the drop bears take the first point with 5:22 left. So we see some swaps coming out from the drop bears. Color Hex moves over to the Pharah. Jordation swaps over to the Sombra, so, sticking with the Sombra going up against Goats, definitely the right call. We do see Yuki switch over to McCree, and Shoyo ends up 5-3 with a self-destruct. Color Hex isn't able to escape from a Primal Rage, and the drop bears have to get out after only getting 1 tick. So, Dark-Sided end up getting scattered, and we see Color Hex come in with the barrage, ends up finding 2, and drop bears put in a pretty good time of 3:10 on their attack. So, definitely going to be an uphill battle for Dark-Sided, who in their time bank round end up diving the high ground, and a Kraken ends up being the first to fall for the drop bears. Drop bears are able to get the resurrect off, and Dark-Sided they're not able to get the kills here. Yuki is able to trigger the overtime, but Molotov ends up falling to the self-destruct. Dark-Sided are cleaned up, and, they're in a position where they have to full hold just to get a draw. So drop bears, 3 minutes, 10 seconds left on the clock, only need 1 tick. Really not a lot to ask for. And on their time bank, we see Quats fall immediately after getting spotted out early. Shoyo ends up getting booped off of the map, and the drop bears look to re-engage. We see the hack coming in onto Color Hex, and Punk ends up finding a kill. And then we see Yuki drop the EMP, finding a Kraken, and then Color Hex comes in with the barrage. Gets 2 with that. The tick is taken by the drop bears, and then they take the 2-1 series lead.
Yeah, it's textbook Volskaya. It goes to time bank, and whichever team has the higher time bank typically wins. It's basically how Volskaya plays out. Again, we see them try to run Goats on defense, and they hold back the first attack. But the problem with Goats is there's no real ult synergy with Goats. So once you start dealing with ultimates and throwing that into the equation, you're basically going to lose unless you can severely outplay the other team, which isn't going to happen at this level. So overall, this kind of went down the way I expected it to. The McCree was a surprise. I didn't expect that because he didn't really fit into what we would traditionally think would go into this, but we got to see the variation of goats on defense, which is Winston goats, monkey goats. So they are evolving somewhat, but it also worked just about as well as regular goats does on defense. It's just coach more mobile, so you die in different places. So overall, this was actually the most boring map of the ones they played, because it was textbook Volskaya. I mean, there were some cool plays, like there was some cool EMPs and some interesting positioning taken by like Pharah. Color Hex was really good about playing some corners, but overall, like there isn't too much to talk about this on this map.
So, moving on, we went to Rialto for map 4, and we got to see a ton of environmental kills. So if you're looking for a map with environmental kills, and, you like that sort of gameplay, check this map out in particular. So, Drop Bears, they have Dredation on the Roadhog on their defense. So not playing DPS, and Dredation usually isn't the one to play Roadhog on this team, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So Turmo ends up getting booped, but is able to use the grapple hook to save himself, so that was a sigh of relief, definitely. And Mooney is actually the one that ends up falling off of the map at the start for Dark-Sided. So Drop Bears end up giving up a lot of ground past the first choke point, and Color Hex opened things up by dropping Molotov. We see Color Hex boop Yuki into the water, and Dark are forced to regroup off of that. So he's looking to drop the... Color Hex is looking to drop the barrage, but doesn't find the value. But it's okay, because Shoyo is there. He finds 2 with a self-destruct. And then this is where the shatters come into play. They're dropped on both sides. Dark-Sided end up using their rally armor to gain the upper hand in that fight. And Dark are able to secure the first objective with 3:11 on the clock. We see Molotov swapping over to Anna in this GOATS comp for Dark. Dark-Sided end up investing 5 ultimates to win the next fight. With Drop Bears only having used a barrage in the fight, so we definitely see the economy swing just because of the heavy investment from Dark-Sided. Quats ends up getting behind Dark-Sided with a minefield, ends up finding 2 in that case, and then Color Hex comes in with a barrage, finds 3 picks, and Dark-Sided fail to get to the second objective as overtime runs out. So moving to the Drop Bears attack, again, more boops coming in. We see Yuki booping Quats into the water. We see Dark-Sided end up getting split with a Dragon Strike, and I can't talk. And Dredation ends up picking Mooney off. So again, main tank falls for Dark-Sided. Cantus is able to get the res off, and the cleanup is there for Dark-Sided. So we see some changes coming out from the Drop Bears. They go to their GOATS counter. They bring out the Pharah. They bring out the Sombra, which has worked pretty good for them throughout this series. Quats ends up dropping Molotov with the minefield, and Dredation is there to just deal with the front line of this GOATS comp. Mooney ends up getting low and gets cleaned up by a Kraken. A Kraken did pretty good throughout this series, just finding the cleanup on the Zenyatta, which I always love to see. Drop Bears, they had some struggles getting to that first point, haven't gotten it in overtime. We see Color Hex get met by Punk when Color Hex goes for the barrage, so he gets taken out of the fight. And I thought it was interesting throughout this series, we saw the swap to McCree to deal with Color Hex on Volskaya, but there really wasn't a lot of synergy at the time, and that just felt like, okay, they were reading a situation, but they didn't capitalize on it. But for the rest of the series, it was pretty much just up to Punk. Punk was really the only one trying to get in Color Hex's face, and that's a lot of work for a diva. But that worked out great in that instance. We see the EMP self-destruct come out from the Drop Bears, which ends up finding 2. But the Dark-Sided tanks end up finding picks back. Yuki comes in with a godlike 3k Pulse Bomb, which ends up forcing Drop Bears to reset. And we usually don't see the value out of Pulse Bomb anymore. Unless it's
not like that.
Unless it's in a Wombo combo with a Graviton Surge. But it's not just like a casual 3k, it just throws in and then bam, there's half the team dead. That never happened, so that really threw me by surprise. So when that happened, like, it was a great time too, because drop bears were forced to reset with 21 seconds left on the clock. So Yuki ends up looking for a Kraken in the back line, but a Kraken drops him low, so that forces a recall from Yuki. And then Quats opens up with a pick on Molotov. Dark-sided ends up getting the better of the exchange. So we see the EMP investment coming out from the drop bears, and then that ends up turning the fight. So we're in overtime now. Turmo has a Graviton up for Dark-sided, and he's the first to fall. So a huge key pick there. Yuki ends up sticking a Kraken with a Pulse Bomb, and it falls apart for Dark-sided when Color Hex drops a barrage, and then the drop bears take it.
Yeah, this map, I talked about it earlier, but Punk really stood out to me this map, and like you said, it's hard for a diva to deal with a Pharah, but Rialto is one of the maps that really works well because the skybox isn't so high that Pharah can get away from a diva easily, especially with all the second floor buildings and stuff like that, which we actually saw Punk utilize quite a bit to shut down barrages or just actual overall attacks. The first point take in overtime by drop bears was phenomenal. That's another play where you feel like Darksided had it the whole time, and then drop bears kind of micro outplayed them to the point where they just kind of pushed it in enough that they could continue the map. Overall, this was a phenomenal map. Like this is what we expected from the final. Like there was a lot of counterplay. There was variation of goats. So now we have gorilla goats and we have grandma goats. So goats, and more goats. And we have anti-goats, which is apparently Farrah Sombra right now, which is working really well. And this is what we wanted in Overwatch. We wanted compositions and we wanted counter compositions. And we're finally starting to see that. And Rialto, if you listen to any number of pros, Rialto is like quickly becoming their second favorite map behind King's Row. Just because of the type of play and different comps that you can run on different points. So, definitely go watch this match if you want to see some interesting like diva plays, if you want to see some Pharah plays. And a Kraken was like my standout for this one because like it didn't matter like where you were on the map. If you were like under 30% health, he would find you and kill you. Like it was crazy. It was just like out of nowhere, like boom, dead. So this is a great map. I mean, this is of all the maps outside of the first one, this was my favorite map to watch.
So moving on, we went to Map 5, which was played on Ilios, and of course this one would be the series decider. So in round 1, we saw a Kraken find an opening pick onto Molotov, his counterpart on the other side of the field. So the drop bears take a clean opening fight to gain the first control. Dredation ends up getting spotted out in the backline, and, Punk comes in, this time in a different way. He ends up eating a pulse bomb attempt. Color Hex ends up booping Molotov into the well, which this won't be the only time it happens. So drop bears at this point have about 50% auto control so far on well. So Dredation again finds Molotov in the backline, so Dark-sided are getting staggered here pretty late. They are able to force the overtime, and Turbo ends up falling to a direct rocket from Color Hex. And Color Hex again boops Molotov into the well, and it's just a clean 100-0 in favor of the drop bears in round 1. So really not a lot of fight given up in regards to Dark-sided in round 1. So moving on, we would go on to Lighthouse for round 2. Dark-sided go back to their tried and true strategy of goats for Lighthouse, and Cantus is the first to fall to Shoyo, but Darksided end up having the positional advantage with goats, so that is actually enough for them to secure the first capture. We see Quats dropping a pile driver, and the barrage looks to chip down this goat's composition, and the cleanup is there for the drop bears to flip the point at 53%. So, Color Hex again comes in with a boop, this time finding Mooney, who gets booped off the map, which opens up the next fight, but the drop bears end up losing Quats in this exchange. Dark-sided end up slowly bringing this one back, end up flipping the point back at 38%. And this is where Color Hex really takes over. It's off of the back of his 2K where Drop Bears end up retaking a point at 82%. He ends up investing a barrage, gets a boop on Cantus, and ends up getting like a 5K in this sequence, which was absolutely insane. Dark-sided, they rush at the points, only to be met with a self-destruct, so they lose 2 there. But they are able to bring the point back, but Drop Bears, man, like... I thought it was interesting. Like, Dark-sided managed to flip the point, but the Drop Bears end up getting the cleanup anyway. They just take control of the point back, wrestle it back in their favor, and then that was enough for Drop Bears to take it. So Drop Bears end up becoming back-to-back Contenders Australia champions. And just as a reminder, like, Color Hex is going to be moving to Toronto Esports, so he'll be in a different Contenders region, but... Sydney Drop Bears have been the best Australian team in Contenders, and I will say this, like, Dark-sided, yes, they did kind of stick to their guns, running a myriad of GOATS compositions. Granted, sometimes they would opt to run a certain healer or a certain tank over a different one, given the situation, but I'm glad in some instances, especially with, like, the time bank maps in particular, that they were able to keep it pretty close on the attack, but all in all, Sydney Drop Bears, just too good.
No, it was phenomenal watching this play out. Like the first map, you think there might be a chance that this one is closer than we initially expected it to be. And then as the rest of the maps played out, the gap just widened and widened and widened. And I think Ilios really showed that. Lighthouse tends to go back and forth regardless of what they're doing, and leads to longer drawn out fights. But the same can be said for Well. And the fact that Well was so dominantly won, I think basically put the final nail in the coffin. So overall, the better team won. I mean, as a whole, Drop Bears are a phenomenal team, and Color Hex definitely deserved to be picked up, but we've already talked about him. But the standouts on the other side for me were definitely Punk and Turmo. Turmo, I think, will find a place on maybe another Contenders team in NA, or maybe he'll stick it out in AU and like the Oceanic region. But I feel like we'll definitely be seeing Punk, just because what we talked about, like tank roles are a little harder to find, especially flex tank roles are becoming more and more important. I've been like an advocate of that flex tank is actually right now one of the most important roles you can have on the team. So going forward, I am curious to see how many more players make the transition to, I guess, what we would consider the bigger regions for Contenders, which would be like NA, EU, and Korea. But overall, this was phenomenal. Like I haven't watched too much of the Oceanic realm, and this was a great introduction. So if you haven't watched any of it, I would watch the semifinal if I were you, between Dark-sided and now my brain Order. That's it. It's been a long day. But definitely check out the final too, because there was a lot of fun stuff going on, especially that first control map, and just watching 6 minutes of goats fighting goats before the point ever gets capped is phenomenal, because you get to see multiple earth shatters and stuff. But yeah, this is a phenomenal series overall.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much talent out there, whether it's Oceanic or South America, that I feel like a lot of them are just kind of getting overlooked. And, that's why I'm really curious to see how some of these players are going to do in one of the more, like, populated regions. So I'm hoping Color Hex is able to maintain a level of play that we have expected to see from him in Oceanic when he does move over to Toronto Esports. But all in all, Contenders Australia playoffs did not disappoint. Sydney Drop Bears repeat as the champions. And as I mentioned earlier, Brazil Gaming House did again repeat as the Contenders South America champions. But we gotta move on and talk about the upcoming group stage of the Overwatch World Cup that is going on this weekend in Los Angeles. So, matches are going to start on September 7th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. These will be broadcasted on Twitch as well as Disney XD. And the matches are actually going to be played on patch 1.27, so this will include all of the support changes. And we have a ton of the Overwatch League on-air talent on hand for this one. So, we have Malik, we have Chris Puckett, Monte Cristo, Doa, Mr. X, Hexagrams, Semler, and Uber. And, we gotta congratulate Uber because he did walk away with the on-camera talent of the year at the Stockholm International Esport Awards. But we got, two powerhouse teams in this group stage. We have Team Canada, we have United States, we have Brazil, Switzerland, Norway, and Austria. And, right out of the gate, when you look at this lineup, there are two clear favorites, just like it was in the Korea group stage. In this case, we have the United States, obvious favorites, given a field. Canada, again, favorites in this current field. And then we have who I would consider two teams that you could see as potential dark horse teams. So I feel like we should talk a little bit about the dark horse teams before we talk about, the US and Canada teams. So let's talk about Brazil. So as I mentioned, Brazil Gaming House, this is the team that has made up the vast majority, if not all, of the Brazil Overwatch World Cup teams since the World Cup started. And again, this year, that is the same case. There's a couple other players from different South American teams, but BGH is the core of this roster. And Brazil Gaming House, when it comes to South America, they have been this, unstoppable force. If there's a tournament in South America, Brazil Gaming House is in it, and they are just cleaning up. They are just winning everything. Everything and everything. And I feel like it's kind of unfortunate in the sense that in South America, there's just such a clear gap between, the top team and then the rest of the field. Because Icarus Gaming, who is an Argentina team, they're the clear, second favorite in that region, and I felt
got wrecked.
I felt like at times their team synergy looked a little bit better, but they got rolled over 4-0 in the grand finals for South America. But, Brazil last year, they were kept out of the top 8. And that was off of the back of getting swept by the United States team. They also got swept by Chinese Taipei. That didn't help them. And, this is going to be a team that you're going to have to either beat Canada or the United States if you're going to be able to advance. Heck, that's the same case for our other dark horse team, too. But Brazil has always kind of been that team where the analysts have constantly tried to hype this team up. It happens every year, and they have yet to live up to the expectations. So with that in mind, are we expecting anything different, or is this just going to be the same case of last year where Brazil is not going to make the cut?
They have a chance to pull off an upset this year. I and many others have been very vocal about some of the choices Team USA has made.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like Brazil Gaming House definitely has a chance. Now, even saying that, I feel like USA still is the stronger team, just based on a synergy, based on coaching, just based overall on everything that we have. I don't know if USA has the team to compete with some of the other, what we would consider top tier teams. But I feel like US and, with that Canada have a pretty safe bet going forward. Brazil, while talented, would really have to show us something we haven't seen yet. And that's it. It's almost that shadow burn factor. It's like that X factor. Brazil has kind of showed us that they're good at playing the comps. They know they're good at playing fundamental Overwatch, but they haven't really shown us, that X factor, that wow factor. They don't surprise us in any way. They run what needs to be ran, and they run it good enough for it to be serviceable. And like you said, there's such a huge gap between them and other teams in their region that it's hard to tell if they're really that good or the other teams are just that bad.
Mm-hmm.
I am really looking at them going in to World Cup as their first real test outside of contenders, because Asaris Gaming is good, but like you said, they didn't. It was like they didn't even show up to the match at times. Like it. The best way I can describe it is it's like an Overwatch League team playing the Shanghai Dragons. Like, sure, they had serviceable moments, but the teamwork was just not even existent. So I'm curious to see how this goes down. And I could gush about Canada and I could gush about some of the players on US, but I think we're looking at some pretty clear winners again, just like we saw with the first qualifier. But you have another team you want to highlight, and this is a team I don't know much about, so I'm going to leave a lot of this to you.
All right, so the other dark horse team that we have to look at is Norway. This is the team that is... There are a couple unknowns, but for the majority of this lineup, there's some pretty incredible talent from Contenders Europe. So first up, we have Onigod, who has made a name for himself as one of the most domineering DPS in Contenders EU, and that was mostly off the back of his Tracer play. Now, I know nowadays, we're not all necessarily in the Tracer meta, but Onigod does have the flexibility to move to the other roles. They have DCOD, Eco, and IPN, who are returning from last year's Overwatch World Cup roster for Norway. And DCOD has been competing in Contenders North America as part of last night's Leftovers. This has been a team that Edinar and I have been gushing about, mostly because of Sugar Free, the 16-year-old prodigy, but also DCOD has been amazing. And LNL were the only non-affiliate team to make a run in the Contenders North America playoffs, which is saying a lot because if you look at Contenders in North America, the affiliate teams basically make up the vast majority of the field. But of course, LNL did eventually fall to an affiliate team, that being Team Envy in the playoffs, but it was a very close series, and DCOD is going to bring a lot to the table. And, we know the popularity of GOATs. We've seen how much work Pharah can do against that sort of composition, and if you're looking for a good Pharah in Contenders, or, this year in the Overwatch World Cup, you have got to keep an eye on Trek, because Pharah is Trek's go-to right now, and he's shown a lot of significant work throughout the last year of Contenders on that particular hero. So if you see a lot of 303 comps, you can expect Trek to put in some serious work overall. So I feel like when we look at these Dark Horse pieces, if I'm looking at Brazil and I'm looking at Norway, I feel like Norway has the better pieces put in place to deal with this current meta than Brazil Gaming House. But either way, it's still going to be an uphill battle. That's why they're a Dark Horse team. But I feel like Norway, out of everyone, is going to be a team that a lot of people are going to overlook, that they really shouldn't. But again, we have Canada, we have the United States, two very clear favorites, and, are we gonna see the Mangachu Torbjorn? Or
I hope so.
Are we gonna see a ton of Pharah? Or is it gonna be both? I don't know, but I kind of want to see the Torbjorn, just, for the sake of it being Mangachu, and, to him, it's not really a troll pick, but I know a lot of people would consider it, but, we did see some electrified hammers coming out in the, kind of in the All-Star weekend. So, we might be seeing a little bit more of that if the opportunity presents itself.
I mean, the good news is Numbani is in the map pool, and Numbani is traditionally one of the few maps that pros consider Torbjorn not a throw pick. He's still not necessarily the ideal pick for most comps, but you have a better chance of seeing him on Numbani. As far as Norway goes, like I said, I don't know a whole lot about the team. I do know of Onigod. I have seen some of his plays, and specifically his Tracer play, but he's also a fairly good Widowmaker from what I've seen recently. Decode, I have absolutely seen. I didn't put it together till I read the note that he was on last night's Leftovers, and he did very well on that role. So I am curious to see what this team does. Being an EU team, I would actually expect them to play a lot of GOATs, not counter it, because EU is kind of the region that invented it.
Yeah, EU
You know,
likes tanks, as some of our episodes tell you.
yeah, exactly. So if they are able to play it and counter it, I feel like they do have a good chance. Um, I don't know enough about them to make a sound analysis, but I think you're right. I think based on what I've seen from the players that I do know, they have the pieces to make a chance, make some plays that could give them a chance, but they do have some pretty tall mountains that they have to climb first.
So that being said, we can definitely look at all the matches. Obviously, the Canada versus United States match is going to be the marquee one. More than likely, that will be the decider of who gets the top seed and who gets the second seed. So, who are you favoring in that match between Canada and Team USA?
Canada. Uh, I I've been vocal with some of the choices on USA, so I'm not gonna be more vocal about it. I am not happy with some of the choices that they have made, although I do think both teams have phenomenal coaches, so they can do what they need to. I hate to say it, but I'm actually rooting for Canada because I kind of want to see a little bit of a redemption arc for XQC. And Slambo's not here, so he can't yell at me for saying his name. But I I don't like XQC as a streamer personality, but everybody that talks about him, like all the pros that know him behind the scenes, say that he is a phenomenal professional player. So we saw glimpses of that last year in the World Cup. So I want to see more of that XQC and less of the raging, screaming monkey. And I'm not talking about Winston. So I still give the edge to Canada unless there's something we see early. USA plays Austria first, then they play Brazil. So they actually don't play Canada until the very last match of the qualifiers. So that is the match we end on day 3. So we will have a much better grasp of where each team falls by the end of it. So unless USA really surprises me those first 2 days, I will be quite surprised. So I'm gonna say 3-1 Canada.
I feel very conflicted on that one in particular. So for one, I hope for Canada's sake that things don't happen with XQC between now and then, because I would hate for Canada to be put in a situation where the the MVP of the World Cup ends up having to sit out because of something said on stream. But that being said, I hope for Team USA's sake that Zachary has been put in more work into his Somber gameplay, because based off of what we have seen in Contenders, there is a lot of room to improve there. So that being said, I know this one's gonna be very close. I have faith in United States to pull it off. But I would not be surprised if it's going to be, a one-map differential in particular. But, with it being so late, if there's, one mishap earlier, that could just shut the, door on someone right at the end. So that should be pretty interesting overall. But I'm giving it to USA. I think they'll take it. And we need that higher seed in, because we don't want to be drawing South Korea in the first round.
We'll get them anyway. It doesn't matter. As last year's proves, it's like we could get them by seed, we can get them by random draw. It doesn't matter. We're gonna play South Korea, and honestly, to me, I'm absolutely rooting for the USA. Just as an analysis, I'm picking Canada, but I'm absolutely rooting for USA. You're gonna have to beat South Korea at some point. So draw them early, draw them late. It doesn't matter. World Cup is always been about who can beat South Korea. So, whether we play in first round, last round, it doesn't matter to me, because we're going to have to beat them eventually.
Absolutely. So who knows? Maybe, the real finals again this year will be South Korea versus United States. And maybe we'll see another breakout Widowmaker performance, this time by Zachary. Who knows? Anything could happen. But this is the time for someone to step up to the plate and, for Team USA, like, they're going to look at someone like Zachary to be that player. Like, usually, like, we haven't had contenders, kind of like, maybe not so much at the forefront compared to years past, but, like, there's definitely been a lot more attention this year. And I would love to just see one of the younger guns just become a household name, like Flower did last year in the World Cup.
Absolutely.
But
I am curious. We talked a little bit about Brazil. I'm actually curious to see how Switzerland does, because they're another team that pulled almost wholesale from an existing org. So I'm curious to see how they stack up. They're mostly made up of Silent Gaming, which isn't a huge name, but I'm curious to see if that's enough to kind of give them at least not getting 4-0'd every match.
well, because it is a group stage, I don't think that'll be enough.
Yep. I had to, we talked about both teams, so I had to throw out the one team that I actually do kind of know a little bit about.
Absolutely. So definitely keep an eye on that. Make sure to tune in Friday night for the Contenders North America Grand Finals. Again, that will be Fusion University, aka the Philadelphia Fusion Academy team, going up against XL2, aka the New York Excelsior Academy team. And, you're even going to see some of the World Cup players on it, because, you got Zachary from Fusion University. Mangashu of Team Canada is on XL2. So tune in for that. Support the Tier 2 scene of Overwatch. But with that being said, guys, we are going to go ahead and close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best ways to do that is to leave us a positive review over on iTunes. We are always looking for ways to improve the show to make for a better listening experience for you. We do have our podcast directory and podcast Overwatch Recall. We got basically everything Overwatch, Overwatch League, and Path of Pro podcast related in episodic listings posted every Sunday night. We also posted our second episode. This one was with Game Watch Today, so you can find that over on iTunes or whatever podcast app. But if you want to find the weekly recall, you can find it on our website at owlnshow.com/weekly recall. But Spider, we got a couple of adjustments. Well, maybe like one major adjustment in regards to social media, which we finally hit, which we're pretty excited about. But where can our listeners know? I can't talk. Let our listeners know where they can get a hold of us on the social medias.
It's been a long show, man. Yeah. So, at this point, if I make it through this without any mess ups, I'd be surprised. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at contact@owlnshow.com. Our Twitter and Instagram is @owlnshow. The website is www.owlnshow.com. YouTube, we finally hit our 100 subscribers. Yay! Woo! So you can find our YouTube at youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. Yes, we threw you a curveball on that one, but it is the whole name of the show spelled out. So definitely go check that out, hit subscribe so we can get our next 100 subscribers. We have content on there every week, mostly just the shows right now because we're kind of in the lull for new content. But obviously, when there's new heroes, new characters, that new Torbjorn rework coming out, we'll definitely have videos up there for you. You can find our Discord at discord.me/OWLN show. If you're not watching us on Twitch and you're listening audio only, I highly advise you watch us on Twitch because then you get to see our beautiful faces. It is twitch.tv/OWLN show. We have 3 primary shows. One of them is on hiatus, so I'll mention that one, but the timing will be off. Basically, our main show, which is Overwatch League Network, which is Mondays at 7 p.m. PDT. That is the core Overwatch League show. That's where we talk about all the roster changes, Overwatch World Cup, Path to Pro. Like I said, that's our core show right now. We do actually have a Path to Pro show that is on hiatus right now, and when that comes back, I will absolutely tell you about that one. But for now, if you want other Overwatch news, you want to listen to Heroes Never Die, that is Wednesdays at 5 p.m. PDT. That is, like I said, basically everything Overwatch. So they do a little World Cup, a little Summer Games, whatever's going on at Overwatch for the week. We also have our host streams, which, like I said, this week I will be doing Friday. I will be learning Doomfist, and you can come laugh at how horrible I am at Doomfist. And then Totem usually takes Saturdays. And both of those typically start around 7:30 PDT. If you want to find myself on Twitter, you can do so at SpiderGD. And like I said, if I'm on Twitch, I'm here at OWLN Show. Slambo, who is not here tonight because he is getting ready for his new coaching job at the Atlanta team.
Yeah, Atlanta Airports.
At the Atlanta Airports. You can find him on Twitter at SlamOverwatch. Be sure to message him for all the juicy details. And what about you, Totem? Where can they find you?
Well, I am over on the Twitter. That is at Little Bluebird at Totally Drunk CTR. And as you mentioned, if I'm live, I'm also live here on this channel 2-4 nights a week, whatever. You never know. Like, crazy things have happened. But with that being said, guys, it's been a long night. It's been a long episode. You can thank Rosterpocalypse for that. And next week probably isn't going to be too much better because there's also going to be a ton of movement. Maybe even some expansion team news? Who knows? Anything could happen, but it is definitely exciting times in competitive Overwatch. But for now, guys, we hope to see you back next week. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Overwatch League Network. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at OWLN Show. The theme music for OWLN is the main theme and victory theme guitar remix by Michael Mack.